Good evening. I know it's crunch time, close to finals, so I'm sure we'll have some few students and faculty who are just finishing up studio, but I want to go ahead and start this evening's program. So good evening and welcome to the Baumer Lecture series. This is our final Baumer Lecture of the semester, which is very exciting. There's one additional event, which is Samia Meem's event, but it'll be at a noontime. It's on the poster as well, April 9th. So that's the final kind of event of this semester, but this is our final one on Wednesday evenings at 5:30. So I thank you all. For those who've been coming to the series, it's been really fantastic to lead it this semester. I'm Ashley Bigham. I'm an associate professor of architecture here at the Knowlton School and also chair of the Baumer Lecture Committee. I want to remind everyone that we will take audience questions following the presentation, so please remain in your seat until the event concludes. And it is my immense pleasure tonight to introduce our speakers, Nima Javidi and Behnaz Assadi. Typically, I start this lecture introduction with a little bit of research I've done. It requires me to look at the visitors' design work. I familiarize myself with their bios and credentials, maybe skim the firm's bio on their website. Although in the words of Michael Meredith and Hilary Sample of Moss, quote, "If given the choice between staring blankly into space or reading architects' office statements on their website, we choose the first." End quote. But I think tonight's guests are the exception to that because I discovered in reading their firm bio that they possess a unique talent of coherently and beautifully writing about their own design work, which is, as a designer myself, I know is a very challenging thing to do. So I actually want to share a bit about their firm, but use their own words, and I hope that's okay. But it was really succinct and nice. So the firm that they co-founded and lead together, GUI Architecture Studio, is a Canadian practice based in Toronto, led by an Iranian-Canadian duo, an architect and a landscape designer, that combines the rootedness of a local architecture firm with the broad interest of an international design studio. From small to medium-sized buildings that confront detail-level building constraints to ambitious international competitions that draw upon the collective repertoire of the discipline, the trajectory of the practice is based on a method of simultaneously working at the opposing ends of the professional spectrum. Taken as a whole, the studio's work invests in larger questions of the discipline, namely how iconographic, geometric, formal, and tectonic pursuits relate to broader contexts such as contemporary art, politics, construction, landscape, and urbanism. By engaging in thoughtful design conversations ranging from the role of public art internationally with curators to the wood joinery of a three-legged chair with local furniture makers, and the virtues of renaturalizing urban plots with neighbors, the studio aims to investigate the core of architecture by operating at numerous points around its periphery, connecting the themes and interests within the studio with those of the world at large. This approach was not chosen for its assurance of success, but as a means of investigating the merit and relevance of GUI's ideas across a wide variety of scales and contexts. See, it's so beautiful. Their work has been widely published and exhibited both nationally and internationally. It has been recognized and awarded on a range of international competitions, from the Guggenheim Helsinki Museum to the Bauhaus Museum in Dessau, and a Progressive Architecture Award to Progressive Architecture Award and 4 Canadian Architects Awards of Excellence. Most recently also winner of the 68th Annual Progressive Architecture Awards in 2021. Nima Javidi is a registered architect interested in the architectural intersections of geometry, structure, and typology, and his built work operates at the threshold of architecture and urbanism, where geometric reconfiguration of building typology is triggered by the conditions of urban morphology. Nima holds an MArch degree from the University of Tehran and an MUD from U of T Daniels. He is currently an assistant professor, adjunct at Cooper Union, and a design critic at Harvard GSD. Behnaz is a landscape architect who, in her practice and teaching, explores landscape architecture's agency beyond disciplinary confines. She is interested in landscape processes and how they relate to the built environment. She uses a multi-scalar frame of investigation, modeling, and drawing of ecological systems with the formal and tectonic accuracy of architectural construction drawings to combine ecological literacy with design specificity in both architecture and landscape architecture. She holds an MLA degree from U of T Daniels and a BFA from the University of Tehran. She is currently assistant professor, research stream at U of T Daniels, and assistant professor adjunct at the Cooper Union. I personally have been an admirer of the work of GUI architecture for several years, and I'm very excited to have them share their work with me and you tonight. So please help me in welcoming Nima and Behnaz.
Okay, this mic works with both?
I think so.
Okay. Thank you for that introduction, Ashley, and thank you for the invitation and the amazing tour today, Eric. It's always challenging to show one's work through linearity of a series of slides, but it also allows us to find new readings and themes of and crossovers in one's own work doing so. So it's always a welcome challenge. And this time we found online transform types and shifting thresholds to be a fitting title. This is us. We are a studio of around 10 people, give or take. As Ashley so elegantly introduced us, I'm not going to go through the introductions, but given both Nima and I's backgrounds and interests, our studio, our almost studio work is it straddles between architecture and urban design, landscape and architecture. And this photo that you see here is a photo that we usually, every year we take a photo around this table. And every year we cover it with models of the projects that received some recognition that year. And this is from last year. I'm not going through our own thing.
No,
it's
just one thing. One of our staff was not present, and we photoshopped him. Just to
oh yeah, that's true. That guy was photoshopped in. Okay, so does it go forward?
Yeah.
No, it doesn't.
It's this. No.
Okay. This is our office from the outside, a corner lot in Beaconsfield Village in West Queen West neighborhood in Toronto. We feel that it's nondescript architecture with corner entry and the unkempt flanked yard with our mock-ups and material experiments and sometimes our proposals, like the one at the very end, is the true register of our mode of practice. Which is precisely why when the Cooper Union asked us to do an exhibition on the work of our practice in New York, we chose the space of our practice over the individual projects and photographed the walls of our studio and overlaid them onto the walls of the corridor gallery there at the scale of 1:1. And the exhibition was actually called 1:1 because we figured that the unrolled surfaces of our practice is exactly the same size as the gallery space at the Cooper Union. One space in Toronto, Canada, the other at Cooper's Foundation Building in New York, which with its rich history, and we placed 1:1 images on the walls, and then we brought in some of the objects from our office. Here you see the sawhorse that we designed, construction drawing set, concrete thing that we designed for Venice Biennale, all of them placed on the image as a scaled reference. These transpositions happened on every surface of the space. The best moments, in its best moments, there were conflations of not just the design objects and their images, but the adjacencies of everyday objects like the fire alarm of one school and the thermostat of the other, which brought the day-to-day rituals of an architecture school and that of an architectural practice into a one-to-one relationship. And of course, windows and views and depth added an interesting dimension to the exhibition. And in this casual pan shot of the exhibition show that Nima took, you could see multiple depths, multiple conflating reciprocities between an object and its image, the light of a space versus the light of the image that was of the office, the depth of the picture versus the depth of the rooms, and even the doorknob of one space versus like a light switch of another.
So I think each of us would explain exactly what is our focus in our, in basically what is our thing, and then you would see some crossovers, and hopefully those are the best moments that happen. I would be talking about only on lines, and this was a title for that GSD had a conversation across, within the core, and it's called Online and On Curve, and I like that, and we just brought it here. And I will be talking about 3 lines in architecture, or 3 scales of lines. And so one of them is the lines in geometry, the other is the lines basically in urbanism. And I would try to argue how architecture operates at a scale that can connect the two in ways no other discipline can do, and that's the best place for architecture, dealing with, or at least our architecture is operating exactly between those 2 scales of line. I'm going to go through it, so it's going to be slightly kind of slow, just because it makes sense to build up the argument, and then I would go faster. But basically, this is one object that, so talking about lines in the geometric lines, this is a piece by Pedro Reyes that I saw in New York in Leson Gallery, and it was sitting on the floor. It's the Mexican artist, he's great, but this was a kind of one-off object that was sitting on the floor, and it has some quality which I thought it's basically the core of our interest in geometry. And at that time I was teaching at U of T, and there were certain things to it, and I will try to read the object with you, and I think some of those themes are present in our work. So first of all, the object has a kind of double read. From one side you see a simple cone that is kind of, you can roll it on the ground. From the others, you almost see the presence of 2. So this is that other side that you almost see the presence of 2. And there is this elegant line that appears on this, this is my favorite line, in basically. And then I saw that and said, yes, that's us. That line that almost fades in the space, and at some point you realize that becomes the vertex of another cone. So the presence of almost 2 is not a coincidence. It's a kind of very elegant or very precise relationship between 2 cones, and perhaps some kind of artistic sanding that allows for that relationship between the 2 to be so balanced and so interesting, and the fading of that line. And I think geometry here operates differently than the way we understand geometry in architecture. We generally think of geometry in architecture as a kind of ordering logic that starts the project. And I think there is a reading of geometry as a kind of intelligent kind of mediator between conditions that are given. And I think this is that. It's kind of intelligence in between. And it's finding those moments. And I'm interested in that understanding of geometry. And the balance between, there are 2 planes one is this plane that is very present, that is the base of the cone. The other is the one that is here. And I think there is we can find a parallel in architecture. We always think of projects as either as plan or section projects or plan project. One is the motivator of the project. And I think there's a balance between the 2 that is delicate here. And I would also argue that both of them can be the motivator, and sometimes it's just a matter of how you relate them. And one of the exercises in Cooper is just giving, a plan of a building and a section of another building, and ask students how, create a whole out of the other, find a building that belongs to both. So that kind of understanding of geometry is interesting, and I think at the end of it is the real ambiguity between if this object is very simple or is very complex, and there's something beautiful about that kind of ambiguity that I think it carries through. The urban line is present in the city, and if you need to know one thing about Toronto, it's a very binary built form. It's either extremely low-rise or high-rise, and that cap on height in the low-rise neighborhoods create a very clear, so this is the orientation of the blocks, and you can see the successive subdivision has created kind of a clear grain onto the context. You have narrow and deep lots that are generated by that kind of successive subdivision of these elongated blocks of the city that comes from that cap. And you're always, any of the residential projects in the city deals with that condition. So there's something beautiful about generic conditions in the city that keeps going across, and all projects are dealing with that. So that's the lines of urbanism. And there's also the anomalous relationship of the service roads or the laneways. The configuration, sometimes it's a T, sometimes it's an I, and all of those create unique conditions within a generic block. So within those two things, we basically most of our work operates in that. And if you think about the kink on the property line here, which is exactly this moment, and the kind of the scooping of light, which is the generator of the section, you get this elegant, I shouldn't call it elegant, but it is. You get that intersecting elegant line. And we try to not only find that in geometry, and I will try to explain when we get to that, how that can be, it's a starting point that architecture deals with that and get more and more out of that kind of delicate relationship. I would go through a few projects very quickly. This is the project is in the neighborhood. So this is our office, and this is the project that is right behind a commercial row, and there's a laneway there. So again, it's a condition of a laneway and a series of turrets that we found on the corner of some of the Victorian houses, and we took the edge and we connected it to one of those and we put it in the back. So that kind of typological elements from this side, and then try to find both understanding the house as a path. We thought it's an interesting theme, but also how you can fold that within that. There's something interesting about a set of stairs that does that, but also how you can inflate the property wall and produce a kind of a thickness that is occupiable. And there is something about the kind of laneways and their quality that they have that is belongs to the servicing side of things. And then your architecture finds itself at the end of it, including the edge. And this is Alison and Peter Smithson's solar pavilion. And there is also something lovely about the existence of this wall and how the architecture is flush with the edge of that in these references for us, always important. That's the first project that I showed. That's the King property line. And that's a side addition. I can look at it bigger. That's a side addition that we try to find a kind of tangential relationship, but still a threshold to go over and also pass under. So those kind of the crisscross that you don't expect to happen at the moment of the addition, but at the same time, the side yard is a function of that moment in the urbanism of the lot division. And we try to create a kind of an architecture promenade that goes under, it gets here, and then it takes this and along that stair, it goes up. This is the front, as you can see, that's the passage, and that's the edge that I already showed. And in this view, you can see the whole thing happening. Within such a small footprint, you have the transition from the main building to that. You have the underside that you can come directly to the backyard, but at the same time, you see the presence or at the edge of the stair that goes up. Exactly at that kinked moment, it becomes a landing and it goes up to the point, basically to capture light, which is the bedroom on the top, and that's the front. This is a kind of multi-unit version of, not the same, but it's a different project, but you can see that theme happening. These were a series of units that we wanted to stack. We used the laneway on the edge, and we used the kind of a crisscross or a scissor stair, not just to access, but also to turn the units to a kind of interlocking scissoring units that have ventilation on both sides, but also they're almost like a version of a townhouse because they are accessed from the grade. This is a project that has a much more it's more constrained. We try to create just a relationship between front and back through kind of tilting or skewing the property lines and create two geometric lines on the front that connects the side in the back and also the side of the ADU, the accessory dwelling unit. That's the presence of it. These are extremely tight, packed project in the city, and how you can take an existing type. And that is also, this next door neighbor is also getting the type and doing their own thing, and also getting references to our project, but taking the type and also transforming it through the means that are available. And you can see that oblique line that is registering the stair at the bottom. That's a threshold and the balcony that it produces on the edge, and that's that line and the intersection of it that becomes basically on one side is the edge of the stair folds over itself, and sometimes it creates these kind of, the barrel vault has this fading line that, it's something. And in the back, you can see again the presence of it becomes a full barrel vault, and also on the edge of it, it's cut by the property line and produces an line. So that kind of relationship of registering a line or doing something that has consequences in architecture across is and it also goes back to, dealing with the existing type is of interest to us. This is an interior of the ADU, the laneway, and how the roof goes down at the moment that the stair is going up, and that kind of intensity, and the relationship between front and back. Now I go through at some point we realized walking in the city, it's nice to see architecture in multiple episodes, and because we were doing these kind of small project, we decided to basically get commission all in one neighborhood, or most of the commissions that we got started to be in one neighborhood, and the ones that were too far, and we don't have a car. So it became a thing to just pick projects in our neighborhood, and we realized we can, explore themes. Every site is different, but you also have shared themes of interest that can go. So this is a kind of it used to be a garage that we turned into a kind of a bakery for an architecture graduate of our school, and these are the openings of the garage. Essentially, there is a barrel vault that is going inside that separates the front and the back of basically the operative part of the bakery, and then we use the garage doors as an intersecting element for the front and back separation. So that is also a very efficient. You enter from this side and you just go through, and you also see the operation in the back. This is the other view. Another project that is tight fit within a kind of urban. It's an addition to the top, and this is a theme that keeps getting developed in our work. How can you maintain a kind of subtraction within the whole that sometimes acts as a patio like here, but gradually it becomes more and more charged with more a threshold condition of inside and outside. This is a gallery on the ground, an artist residency on the top, and a speakeasy, basically a speakeasy in the back. So it's a packed, narrow project that has a very odd outline. This is a kind of old building, and as you can see, it's very deep and it's also skewed. So as part of again, bringing the lines of urbanism into the consciousness of the project, when we get, and it's also, these are very kind of simple minimum means project, but when we get to the end, this is the kind of perpendicular to the street. So when you're on the street, you don't recognize the skew or the oblique of the project. And we wanted to make sure by the time you get to the end, you have that kind of double consciousness of those relationship between the two lines. So this is how you enter. You see the kind of the orientation of the skylight, and it's a big skylight for the size of the gallery that is in the back. And it also goes in this is the second floor. You can access it from the third and the second, and you have that double height in the back. This is a gallery and a hotel, again, existing, this is a kind of a retrofit, but we changed the front to create a kind of a subterranean condition right next to the sidewalk. We love the kind of, again, an urban threshold that has a kind of subterranean relationship, and it became a gallery here and a hotel on top, 2 gallery levels, and this is a kind of existing building that we changed completely the circulation, and we turned 2 nodes of access and service on the gallery side, and then all of the subdivided small units on top. This is that kind of a glimpse of that threshold, and that's basically from the main level looking how it goes down and up. It has a kind of cavernous quality. The stairs change. Some of these projects we try to work with the constraints of a real project in the city. We also like the fact that we are building a lot in one neighborhood, and sometimes you have to just basically like the idea of working with the constraints of how you build in the city and in the neighborhood. This is the hotel level. This is the gallery level. It's just one giant space, and they've the curator of the gallery, they've basically organized it as just a kind of one series of one-shot space, and I think they did a great job. And this is you.
Okay, so Since the prompt is a line in the same spirit as Nima, I will try to define line in landscape as a tool and a flexible threshold. That this threshold that thickens and thins, disappears and reappears, that separates landscape from architecture, site from building, figure from ground, inside from out. And I like this this line by Diana Balmori a lot because it is that line. This line has been present in landscape history since man decided to tame and control unruly nature as walls around gardens. But we're interested in these lines less as a divider and more as a moment of crossover or flexible thresholds, where unpredictability of ecological processes meets the abstraction of urbanity. A threshold that operates at different scales at every aspect of our professional life, from practice, teaching, research, and in many ways it also seeps from one to the other. Lines are also how we draw landscape with precision, drawing what is above ground and readily visible, and that which is below and not immediately noticeable. Drawing in a line, the movement of water, changing moisture, heat, temperature in and around the site, and how these shifts impacts patterns of ecology at any given site at different scales. These are some of the drawings of my students at the University of Toronto. This is Toronto Island, mapping the impact of climate change on the constructed land, this constructed land in Lake Ontario, with the same level of accuracy that one draws architectural details, mapping the rich riparian edge of this island and the disturbance caused by human movement and the resultant shifting ecology. At high and low water, storm event, flood, drought, and we draw these conditions in plan and in section. In lines with meticulous detail, ecology, geology, hydrology is drawn on any given site. Here you can see in section the constructed edge of an island, a newly established ecology, and an educated guess on the behavior in a storm event surging its constructed shores. So drawings are in reality, they're tools by which we approach landscape, both in teaching and in our practice. Lines also represent thresholds or crossovers. Our office flankage yard is one such threshold. Thresholds are flankage yards in Toronto are peculiar urban spaces protected by city bylaw and maintained by property owners. A vast number of interconnected yet fragmented network of ecology, where a change to ecological makeup of one can impact that of an entire neighborhood. And this doesn't look great, I know, but there is a method to our madness. We laid a grid system across our side yard using the quadrant technique and to isolate standard units and study the number, type, and patterns of plants, the distribution across as a way of understanding its change over time, always preserving the plant and their chosen position with minor mindful intervenings on our side. 300 squares were marked and systematically documented over the course of, now 4 years. The species were collected, documented, and cataloged. These are mostly what we call spontaneous plants and what our neighbors call weed. So our neighbors are not very happy with our little experiment here. We study the temporal change and movement across our yard and its impact on the large and immediate neighborhood. Which yielded an interesting shift in the ecological makeup of our surrounding, from manicured lawns to now mostly wild meadows, which, as we all know, encourages pollination and promotes biodiversity. This threshold is also where our one-to-one mock-ups are. In many ways, a lot of our practices originated from this side yard. The first one is a rain garden we designed for the excess runoff from our roof. The middle one is one of our interns swaying in a fire pit we designed that we'd make lunch or food in the office when the weather is nice. The other one is a study of the facade of one of our projects that I think you showed, or you will show?
I will show.
You will show. And the last one is actually a study of standard paver units and how different patterns can impact the percentage of permeability, which ended up being the landscape of 44 Foxley, which Nima showed.
I did show.
I know.
Yes.
So this is a threshold of permeability and impermeability, biotic and abiotic, and my favorite moment on the left is a moment of spontaneity. This was actually an exercise to find a pattern that provides 70% permeable or soft landscaping, which is required by the City of Toronto for any house, residential house's front yard. And we were trying to avoid the typical solution of a walkway and a patch of grass. Similar threshold at a slightly larger scale, very recent project. Grounding Meadow was for the landscape of the OAA headquarter, which is Ontario Association of Architects, the equivalent of your AIA, I think.
Yes.
Which was a competition open to all architects and registered architects and landscape architects, which we won. This is the building as it stands today. It's a modernist building in a suburban context, which is marked by the footprint of vehicles in form of parking and driveways. An ecological threshold at the entrance of the building became a moment of, I think this project is perhaps the best instance of a crossover between our interests. So I'm excited to show this project. The entrance of the building becomes the moment of convergence of different flows, flows of ecology, water, wildlife below, and flows of human vehicles above, where a light tectonic bridge lifts and spans over a sculpted landscape, creating room for water and ecology below. The site is on a part of Dawn's watershed. Dawn is one of, Toronto has two ravine systems, Humber and Dawn, which kind of bookends downtown Toronto. And you see at the bottom of that model, well, no, I can do this. Here and here, this is Dawn, and which makes our project similar to our Sard Yard, the importance of it much bigger than its footprint, because what we do here will impact the ecological makeup of Dawn and vice versa. So the proximity to the Dawn and the rich indigenous history of this land made it so that it was only fitting that the ground becomes the protagonist of our project. The project began with the removal of the existing driveway and replacing it with a permeable and sculpted bridge that spans across the meadow and provides access to the building. These were some of the preliminary studies that we did at this point. We were just studying patterns of ecology, permeability and impermeability, mostly two-dimensional. Then we delaminated or lifted the bridge, the driveway, and turned it into a bridge and started sculpting the ground, which kind of the project gained a third dimension. The ground became a series of sculpted bioretention ponds or cells, circular in plan and a bit more organic in section, with accentuated ridges that offered a level of definition to our groundwork and also to help contain water in the site. And each pond had 3 distinct moisture levels, wet, medium, and dry. And each zone is planted with a combination of low maintenance native perennials and grass, creating a wild meadow, registered precisely to the anticipated degree of wetness of each bioretention cell. The bridge subtly lifts and registers the pedestrian and vehicular access over this sculpted land. In this section, you clearly can see the geometry of one of the cells, accentuated edges, and then the bridge kind of hovering over the landscape. And we draw, as you see, landscape with the same level of precision that we draw the bridge. So this lift registers pedestrian access. We use grating as the material to reduce impermeability and allow light and water to go down below to the meadow, and its geometry and relationship to the ground leaves room for the meadow to grow beneath and sometimes protrude from between, which later on the client absolutely hated that idea for accessibility. And this is, of course, a night shot of the project. Linear lights are embedded into the metal grating structure, illuminating the meadow below, which in turn enhances the ephemerality of the metal grating bridge. Yeah. And then this was our and jury's favorite image of the project. It highlights the greater ambitions of the project for the meadow to bring the experience of the ravine into the site and recontextualize the building. This project is a testament to a reciprocal relationship between landscape and architecture, and a true example of how we operate, I think.
Yes. And so if the first one was line, the second part that I would be talking about would be about party walls, or generally seams in architecture. And as those of us who teach, we know that there is some relationship between what we teach and how basically the projects that we do in our offices. And sometimes after a while you find, and they kind of feed both ways. It's never from one to the other. So I will start with a set of assignments that this year I gave to for my Cooper studio, and then the GSD one also has a variation of that. And it's about party walls. It's about lines on the moments of aggregation or the seams of aggregation, and I will explain how. And both of them deal with housing. So we also, for the Cooper studio, this was the time that we wanted to bring up more the idea of typology as something that is a kind of a set of an arrangement that exists prior to the start of the project. So it's less about one-offs, it's something that exists. And the site of the project was in Toronto, but this is a London townhouse. And you can see that how an idea and a set of agreements, it goes from one context to the other, and that's the history of typology, both charged, problematic, and also interesting. That is less about authorship of single project. And also in the simple act of just creating four 4 rooms back to back and directly accessed from the street. That idea of packing is charged because each of the 2 adjacent houses, they share a party wall. A party wall is exactly on that moment of division of lot that basically two adjacent neighbors share a wall. They share the ownership, but the wall is also structurally dealing with both of the spanning of the 2 houses. So there is something charged and interesting about party walls. And the prompt of the studio was how to change the shared elements in a set of townhouses from an object to a space. So the idea was we gave a series of townhouses from different cities to the students, and we asked them to pick a room. It's a kind of warm-up exercise, but it again became very productive in the whole housing project. And take 2 rooms, however you want to pick them. It can be side by side, and the moment you kind of remove the party wall, there's a structural element of spanning, but there's also a shared new room condition that is produced. If it's at the end, there's a question of what happens to the original operation of the type, because you have to go through a share to get to the end of your unit. The sequence, the relationship of that to the rituals of domesticity was interesting, and if you pick the rooms, things become much more complicated or interestingly complicated when, for example, you pick the rooms that are across the corridor and you create the shared space. In that sense, then suddenly the symmetry is broken, and the stair has to also accommodate this new condition, this crisscross. So a lot of ingredients in architecture starts to get implicated, and as part of, this is something you may agree on, like good assignments for studios are less about your work. They have to be generic, they have to be meaningful and kind of broad, and they're great if they're simple. So it starts simple, and gradually students would think about configurations within the adjacent houses, how a notion of a shared can be created within. For GSD was more about kind of hybridizing the 2. And think about, this was an example, I just picked out the project on the right. It's by a London firm, Pike Al-Jawad, and it looks like a project that we could have done, or we should have done. And I thought, okay, what would be the logic of creating a hybrid between the 2? And this was just a diagram. This time A and B are 2 bars, but B has a kind of oblique aggregating logic, or a kind of, this Q is present in the way things are being kind of staggered and aggregated. So that, how can you think about the scene now in this condition? If you alternate them and you prepare, you create a whole. This time the whole has kind of traits of both of these projects, and if you take the room of one and put it in the kind of setback of the back, suddenly you have a kind of a notion of shared is created that is kind of exchanged between the 2, and it's more spatial. So that's the exercise, the starting exercise of the GSD studio, and it's about how we can share. And I think that theme in housing is very profound and it's very important, but the technique of it is something that architecture can really get, is one of those themes that we can dive into and learn more and kind of establish the nuances within that range. And I would go through one project of our office. We call it party wall, but essentially it's a party wall and 2 adjacent row houses that they share that, except the one in the middle is, it's trapped in the middle. The one on the side has the access of a laneway, or the presence of a laneway or service road on the side. And the idea was pairing of 2 stairs. These are the 2 stairs with 2 kind of gardens that later on we talk about this theme within the building. By the way, today the best moment was when Ashley took us to the end of the ramp and we saw the garden. And when you mentioned that it's a garden, it's not a green roof, that was the best moment. So it's a theme that is becoming present in our work, and this was a pairing of a stair, but also because it was a multi-generational house and the ADUs and the laneways were already given, we thought it's good that for each building there's also a kind of a nested outdoor space within the building, except this one cannot have that kind of access to light, so that kind of typological difference would push the garden to come to the front. So this is on the front for this house, and the other one also, the other one is already in the middle. But in the section, so this is the garden that is on the front, this is the garden that is in the middle. And that's a condition that I was trying to explain. This one is in the middle and it has the access. This one is using the front for that. That's the elevation from there, and you can see the opening to that. It's a bit contained. So it's a condition of a double, that the entries are also different. One goes to the bottom, there's a kind of a threshold to the basement, so it's kind of subterranean. The living space is above, the other one goes directly to the living space. And this was the condition of getting from the underground to the lane, to the ADU. Half of it is built, this half is essentially this, and we're also finishing the interior. This there is kind of fabricated outside, and we deal with, I will explain, one of the themes of having, building some of these projects. Gradually you understand, you appreciate and you learn more about the North American construction method, the light wood frame construction. And this is that garden on the third level. There is a piece of plywood up there. When they remove it, it's going to be much more bright, and it's a great idea, moment for a garden that is nested within the shell. But the idea of tectonic, the kind of hybrid tectonic, two building systems, is very present even in the most kind of normative houses in North America, because the ground is handled by generally foundation walls that are made of stereotomic systems, CMUs or concrete. And we try to extend it within the core of the building up, and create more interlock. So the only thing that we've been doing in this project is think about the interlocking relationship between the wood components and the concrete. So that is a theme that we've been kind of getting more and more interested in it. We had a proposal for Venice Biennale that was finalist in
Twice,
yes, thank you. Twice. It never got to the end, but it's again about that, how the relationship between the heftiness of the ground and the lightness of the bob. We call it boring lightness because it was boring in a sense, but also the act of boring or taking out a cylindrical extract of something was the theme. And this is Behnaz showing. We built a few of them, and it's a 1/4 inch scale. And there was something about the lightness. It's one of those things that when you kind of come to North America, you start walking in buildings that slightly move, and that is an experience that is kind of quite interesting. And we think the lightness in North American architecture can become more expressive or become more into the consciousness of the discipline. And that was one. But the funny thing is, as you go through the kind of mass timber now, you realize those kind of relationships are still present in a lot of the buildings that are getting built in Europe. On the theme of mass timber, still there are linear members, there are aggregation of linear members, and they still have that kind of relationship between the kind of stereotomic or concrete base that is also becomes the core, and the kind of the basketry of wood that sits on top. And I'm going to go through now a set of projects, competitions. This is a recent one that we got honorable mention. It's in Turku, in second city in Finland, and I'm just we have selected this because it goes back to the idea of a shared threshold and how aggregations can sometimes create a whole range of conditions through simple operations. So we took the shed typology of this kind of what used to be an industrial port, but also the site we had to address a few key buildings. One of them was the Turku Castle, and we took that typology and we started creating one, and we rotate and we copy. And we created four different conditions. This is a kind of coplanar moment between a kind of root surface that meets the complete planar moment. We registered that. And as you can see, there are ways of the rotation creates different conditions, but at the same time, on the other side, all of the clear stories. So certain things in the act of rotation does not operate. So that what remains constant, what remains rotated, those kind of thinking about simple operations, but with kind of profound relationships or impact in architecture is interesting. And also we try to create a kind of open the ground in the act of aggregation. Things can become structural. So you can have deep beams that are kind of structural and can sit on the kind of a ledge of a beam. And then you can kind of clear the grounds from presence. This is the ground that is occupied. There is also the presence of more and more we are trying to deal with the kind of ground that is extremely flush, and also deals with the question of water in the methods that Ben has already explained, and also becomes these kind of moments of entry, and then more public functions at grade. But as you go to the top, you would see the presence of how galleries that are kind of contained, but at the same time you get these notions of seamless thresholds from one to the other, and the administrative part towards the end as the building kind of shrinks on the top. So the theme of type, the kind of transformation of types, and the range of spaces that you can produce was interesting, and also the tectonic part that we are kind of carrying forward that interest. This is the ground. Those are the retention ponds that Behnaz mentioned, and how we're always trying to create a kind of seamless connection that you can walk, and you can also have deal with the problem of water that is right on that edge. So that kind of continuity at grade, the presence of the building, and also the conditions of all of these four seams that it's, I would say it has some of the themes about the core qualities of that first object that I showed you. The section that shows, even within the section, how you can capture light for the side that goes to the front, and how so you can have 1.5 stories with the galleries looking down, and also the attic space, or that would be allocated to more of the kind of administrative elements. This is another kind of aggregation. This is a project for Bauhaus. It was a 2-stage competition, 800 entries in the first round. Second round, we got the 4th prize. We still like it because again, some of those themes are present here. I would say this is it's a building on the park, and it's also interesting. It's a fact that so Bauhaus, there is, the Gropius's Bauhaus is in Dessau, and this building is also in Dessau. And but the site of the competition is not within the school campus. It's actually in the city, and there is something about the role of how projects now more and more are looking towards the kind of the historic part of the city as the hub for. So even in the south, the museum is actually next to some of these older buildings, and we wanted to have a nod to both of them. So it's the logic of the project is the kind of the pinwheeling of, if you know, we don't have it here, but the famous plan of Bauhaus, but it's kind of a 6 reciprocal pinwheeling that is happening. But the moments, so it creates one big room on the top that can be curated, but there's also these qualities that we like, again, the double read or the ambiguous relationship. You would read this wall as the end of one, but at the same time, when you come to this seam belongs to the volume below. So there is a kind of overlap between the two and also becomes moments of entry and threshold. And that is present. This is the reciprocal beams that you can see. We built a lot of these models, and we were going full on for the thing. We got the 4th prize, but we love that table. This is the plan. You would see, again, those kind of shared walls between the kind of aggregation and also the gap that I explained in the volume that registers essentially becomes critical moments for capturing light, but also passage. And again, Behnaz creating the kind of these lovely relationship between the building and the landscape. I was showing this to the students, and there's a lot of working with both paving and artistic fading of a grade that we don't know. And also the idea of how you can create a kind of controlled public realm that is flush at grade, but also gets into the kind of deep threshold of the building. That's the room that we created on the top as one big space that is articulated spatially, but at the same time allows for larger curations. This is another project in Tartu. This didn't win anything because maybe we pushed but it was the idea of, again, same thinking about mass timber that is coming from our learning in North American construction method. But the idea is more present here, how you can think about the act of rotating elements out from a kind of a pure rigid rectangle or square in the middle. That allows strategically for the placement of some of the existing trees of the side, but at the same time creating the overlap this time becomes points of entry and essentially voids that. So how can you think about the kind of a rotated overlap as a void? And that can become kind of rain gardens. It can also become, you can also kind of preserve, we strategically pick those moments to relate to some of the trees that were kind of remaining in the middle of the park, but also try to overlay it with both entry and also circulation. and maybe that's why they had too many things happening on the same note. But also the kind of relationship of reading and not reading the purity of the square, the moment these threshold, or the kind of transition from one space to the other, and the kind of definition of a room, and then kind of you don't know if you're dealing with one collective or one large space or a series of spaces that are connected but also slightly more defined and separated was present there. Those are the kind of those spaces, and that's the project on the ground. It was a very massive program, and we had to connect a performance hall or a small performance hall from the base to the museum and the library, and also the parking structure on the side. This is the project in the context. We really worked out in a way to create a big building that sits on the side almost effortlessly and with these points of entry. And that's the presence of the project onto the park. We wanted to have connection to the park, but we wanted to make sure that the entries remain deep into those critical moments between the volumes. It's not an aggregation of just a series of volumes. When it gets to the center, it becomes one. So these are the kind of themes that we are interested in. We were also looking at, we always look at precedents in history. If you think about the different versions of this act of aggregation has been done, the level of, between the Sterling, the Sterling version versus the Kahn. I'm trying to remember the mother house. What was the Kahn's? Dominican mother house. So this famous Kahn project, the kind of point connection and the framing of in the back versus the legibility of kind of typological elements being aggregated, still point connection as a transition from one to the other versus the Kerez's project, which is a gymnasium that basically subtracted all of the tree roots and created one big space that is kind of correlated on the edge. So we always relate our mode of work to some of those precedents in history to always situate ourselves. And now that's your turn.
So yes, as you saw, I think in most of these, particularly in the last one, we're kind of trying to move these thresholds inwards in the projects. And recently, it's become more and more, I would say, where there's more interaction between the insulated and predictable built form and unpredictable and messy ecological systems. Which I guess it began with a cross-disciplinary options studio I taught first at the University of Toronto, and then now currently I'm teaching it at the Cooper Union, called Plant Diaspora, which where the term diaspora, typically used for humans, refers to plants displaced or relocated from their original habitat. The studio was a way of exploring topics in architectural tectonics, ecology, climate change, immigration, displacement, and more, using greenhouse, or more specifically, what we call Wardian rooms. It's a riff on Wardian case, which was a case that was used to transport plants during colonial expansion, as a vehicle for our explorations. A greenhouse is the perfect example, in my mind, of the crossover between architecture and landscape, a house and a garden. The studio started with typological studies of greenhouses and their tectonic qualities, systems of climate control, even the troubled history, which laid the ground for the design explorations. These are some of the models that my students at Cooper built, resulting in spatial, tectonic, and climatically charged explorations at the size of a room. And in both cases, Daniels and Cooper, in relation to the respective school. Here is one spadina at Daniels, and this one is the foundation building at Cooper. These rooms are perfect crossovers between architecture and landscape, where as much emphasis has been placed on ecological precision as on tectonic resolution. This was a contractable room for Siroma, which is was an endangered plant from Korea, designed and assembled during the review. As you see, the design was a lean-to greenhouse, which took cues from the neo-Gothic architecture of the school, both as its in overall geometry and functionality of its details, such as the hinge that you just saw, which through its expansion on that curved line and locking it in place, it both creates potential for it to be transported, so it becomes a narrower thing, and it also expands for a human to be able to crawl in and maintain the plants. The play on that flexible threshold, and this is the last project we're going to show you, I promise, and moving this line inward informed our most recent entry for a new Museum of Architecture and Design in Helsinki, Finland. The Light Stack. This is the same site as Guggenheim Helsinki competition we entered way back. That was the largest international competition that with 1,700,
yes.
yeah. We got an honorable mention there, and we were invited to do this one. The project was a unique urban site where multiple flows of urbanity and ecology converge. In many ways, another ecological threshold created by the proximity of a hill over here and the water's edge, South Harbor in the front. This is a historical park, with I think a palace inside of it. And our response, a simple stacking gesture of a pure cylinder placed on a low multifaceted base as both a formal and a performative strategy. Architecture as its moment of intersection with the site informs flows of ecology and people. The base operates urbanistically and channels all of the site's flows and movements into the museum, sometimes ending in the exhibition and sometimes as a passage connecting different parts of the city. And we also proposed a pedestrian bridge in the back, which is this one, that connects the museum to the park behind. The base was the maximum allowable footprint, and on the top, that cylinder shrinks and separates itself from the row of developments in the district, playing a double role of urban conformity at the street level and iconographic singularity at cityscape above. And here is a model of the project again in wood. The project and the pedestrian bridge over here, and there's a as I will talk about it a little bit later, greenhouses within. Programmatically, the museum tries to open the contemporary museum typology from the duality of accessible public functions and black box exhibition to more nuanced concept of the museum as a series of interconnected rooms with different degrees of climatic separations, from enclosed galleries to semi-enclosed spaces to interior greenhouses. Here you see the visitor experience in these number of snapshots shots, the experience of the city and the slow transition from outside into the building, and then different exhibition spaces, and then here you have the greenhouse inside of the building. We worked with TransSolar in New York to really push this idea of a museum with different degrees of climate separation, which came down to detailed studies to optimize the performance of the building overall massing and the location and scale of the two greenhouses inside. So we did a lot of sun studies in like winter solstice and all of that. And in the end, the museum became series of rooms with different climate conditions, from highly controlled galleries and back of the house and cafe and gift shop to extended natural ventilation, we called it, in the greenhouses or winter gardens, and then outdoor spaces. A climatically flexible museum fitting for 21st century museum.
And TransSolar, they're great in just throwing so many great ideas. They're all how buildings can function ecologically and how potentially all of those strategies, sustainable strategies exist. And as we were talking about the greenhouse, gradually this kind of transition from just having two greenhouses in the building to a whole museum that is based on that came from the conversation. These are their studies, which are quite nice.
Yeah. Here is a shot of the greenhouse space with the South Harbor there in the back, and the translucent exterior cladding allows for expression of architectural tectonic and even the expression of the ecology within. It also allows ample light through to the greenhouse. In the place where you have six months of the year, you have very limited sunlight. And then you see the similar grating as the project in the OAA for the ground. And the slow transition from outside in, where the urban threshold makes way for the city life to breathe into the museum. And some of Nima's favorite moments here, mass timber beam sitting on concrete wall, and that I'm sure you love the fact that the cylinder barely touches the two winter gardens were designed inside of this museum. One of them you see here to the east of the project, and there was another one that I will show to the south side, and each of them had different ecology, and both generate solar gain for passive heating in the museum. Here you see, this is South Harbor, and the lobby, the back of the house, and this is a pedestrian ramp in the center that kind of, you see it over here as well, which folds down and connects the upper floor to the entry and even the harbor's edge, and then the exhibition spaces are these open spaces filled with objects curated, and the overlap between the climate comfort of plants and humans and the curation of the objects. Here you see that one of the greenhouses right there in the back, and Haydak's, that's your footprint.
Yes. One of the great jurors, they had multiple jurors, one of them was great, and she was, I don't know, her work had relationship to Haydak. We thought if we put this, we have a more chance of
Here you see the southern greenhouse right there, and you can see the proximity that it has with the exhibition spaces within the museum, which was made possible with that carefully curated control that TransSolar is famous for. The structure is a hybrid system of concrete foundations and service core supporting a mass timber structure of glulam beams and deep wood girders sitting on 4 shear walls on the edge of different rooms and spaces. I'm sure you would have drawn lines on these, but I'm not gonna. We worked with Knippers Helbig, which Nima taught with them at the Cooper Union, and they're amazing, based in New York for the structure. And from them, we kind of learned that the mass timber is a careful balance between the amount of steel and mass timber and the type of connections which can offer new and exciting possibilities. Here, the connection that we propose can be disassembled, which means that the museum at some time can be disassembled and moved while the footprint remains. Here you see the muted icon of the project in the context of South Harbor. The purity of the translucent cylinder on the top, and the reveal of the internal life, winter garden, people and objects, and the gentle cut on the roof. Right there, if you can see it, that registers the sidedness of the project on the ground. In the end, the project was an exercise of how to imagine a range of ecological and ecologies and rituals inside of a museum, and how to structure a building's future adaptation and perhaps even its absence. And in the end, we would perhaps close on 2 upcoming book projects. Non-Native, which is a book on non-nativity across few themes and around our work at JA, and 1-to-1 to 1-to-1000, which is a book on landscape representations. And we are looking for publishers, so any recommendations is welcome. And that's it.
Thank you.
Yes?
Are there questions in the audience?
One at a time, guys.
Yes.
I think I'm familiar with the concept of like vernacular design and the context of the environment that has like an influence on it. But like, I was wondering if you could speak more to kind of like the idea of like local like flora and even the species themselves that have an effect. And as you're speaking with like the museum project, it also seems like how like I feel like local climate and like greenhouse spaces, internalizing like green space there. Design, but like how might like species themselves affect that project?
If I understand your question correctly, are you talking about how we decide on the type of species that we introduce in different climates for each one of these projects? Because a greenhouse ideally a greenhouse is supposed to be climatically controlled, that you can do anything, but that has been the problem, that we've introduced plants from different places to different places, and that caused I don't call it a problem, I like that problem, but some people do not like the non-native plants to be in different places. But I don't think there is, with the climate change, there is such a thing as a species belonging to an area, because the climate plant hardy zones are shifting so much so that Toronto, for example, was zone 4 and now it's zone 6. So the plants that would have survived in Toronto would not survive in Toronto anyways. So I think when it comes to plants and the selection of them, we're very flexible, because we're shifting as the climate it shifts. So there is no defined species for a location, but we do study what grows there and how to maintain it. And usually we fall on the low maintenance side of things, so that also factors in our decisions.
It's sort of like a moment where I wasn't sure I heard correctly about that projects. I wonder if you could speak to how that came about and why.
Yes. So the first project that we developed our first project ourselves, because we belong. I mean, I think there's also some later on historians or maybe contemporary historians should talk about the range of practices that came right after recession, economic meltdown, like 2008 practices. Because we went to I think architecture school at the time, at the highest moment of optimism about the role of architecture, and then we had that. So we are, and also the first project that we did, because we were also on that, we opened our office, we didn't have any projects, so we thought, okay, to develop, and we were very hopeful that there's a market for good architecture. So we developed our project in a neighborhood that we thought, okay, if there's a market, there has to be wealth, and let's go there. So it wasn't the neighborhood that we live in, or we used to live in, and we went to a good, by good I mean wealthy neighborhood for that project. And when we finished it, it was a good project, everybody appreciated it, and we we broke even. So it was kind of and then we had to move our office to this neighborhood. And at that moment, we realized that it's a different neighborhood. It's not clear that it doesn't have. So we picked the neighborhood just because we had to move our office. And when we moved the office, we did the kind of storefront at the base of our building. And we noticed even we have to recalibrate. So it's a neighborhood that people do care about design, but they also kind of put off by if it's too much design or, oh my God. So we like the attention to design, also the warning of this is too design. And we thought, okay, how can we be too design in this neighborhood? Not to lower it down, but just, and gradually that's how it started. Our office was there, and then we had to move out from that office, and we bought the property. That's a kind of live work setup that we have. And we don't have car. Gradually, just because the culture in the neighborhood already existed, and it's a neighborhood in transition, and it doesn't have a kind of one type of, like, let's say, Victorian dominant. It's a Portuguese neighborhood. It has a kind of, now very edgy, but it's kind of very not Victorian. It's kind of flat facade. And so that's how it started. And most of our projects, as a result of that, became much more. And it's much easier in terms of going to the site and always being around the project. And we learned that, developing our first work. And not to necessarily show, there was a time that, there was a lot of arguments about architects being the kind of master builders. And now, at least the way we see things, the architects that maintain certain distance, I think they, like people like Caesar, that they were kind of very engaged in a kind of a productive building culture, but they always remained a kind of architect. But we did learn a lot from having developed that project. And now we go to a lot of these projects on the site, we understand the economy a bit better. And we like also people like Gary that built a lot, not just necessarily in one neighborhood, but they learn from the culture of building. I think there is something amazing also about Gary in North America, just because of, we know the great, we know the kind of masterpieces, but a lot of the earlier Gary are kind of quite interesting, and how the kind of reality of construction became very informative in the best part of the architecture. So those are the things. How we get there, I think your question is also how we do say no to projects that are far. And
I was going to say laziness is part of it.
Laziness.
We really
and
do
sometimes
not
we're
want to
lucky that
travel
we get
far.
that. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, I'll go. So,
Yes.
Thank you.
First.
Maybe related to Jay's question, I think is the way you presented your office. It wasn't presented as just a practice, but the actual office itself as a
Yes.
place
Yeah.
was really, I think, foregrounded.
Yes.
both in the exhibition at Cooper, but also how you describe the office itself as a form of maybe a design laboratory where you utilize different spaces for mock-ups or testing landscape and so forth. And of course, maybe the tactile nature of the work itself, the reliance on not just mock-ups, but models, physical objects, table,
Yes. Yes.
etc. So I guess my question is, how, if you think that culture has changed or is changing, especially since COVID, and also since both of you are educators, how do you understand the studio space as a kind of an office? And does that have a sense of place for you as well? And if so, how?
Yes. My answer to your question might not be immediate, but I have a few thoughts about just studio, and that's how we know that the core, how studios start with, they want to be focused on something. We really open our studio just knowing that even pre-recession, all of that, we really didn't like the offices in North America, in Canada, in Toronto specifically. Even though we learned a lot from them, we thought the transition from academia, which is kind of pure disciplinary interest, to very kind of earnest professionalism of the North America, there's just too binary. So, and we didn't start as educators. We really wanted to be radical in just running a studio that is a licensed studio, and we do architecture. We have all kinds of liabilities, so we were not afraid of that, but we wanted to be. So that's why we were always very curious, and so the presence of models was something that we never. The models are the most important part of our kind of studio culture, and we wanted to commit to models. Those are the things that remain, and still we learn a lot from them being in the same space. So our studio is like, all of our models are there. We never give them to clients. They are not for the clients. They are really the development of the project. So all of it is combined, and also the place of our practice is something, again, a lot of people are trying to think about what is the best way to practice in North America, because it's a place, it's the, disciplinary thoughts always, has been coming from the contemporary disciplinary thoughts have been produced in North America in a very serious way. But when it comes to practice or to practicing them, it becomes much more difficult to the point. And all of us, we have our own strategies of finding ways of moving things. Sometimes I think even right now, there's a whole range of kind of more collective efforts of questioning the systems, how the labor, all of it. There's all kinds of efforts. Our version was very focused. That was the project, how to run this kind of middle ground practice. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is committed. And it's a question of labor. Like, all of our models are very labor intense, and we like that reality of how the time of architecture should not get framed into the way, the framework of a professional side of architecture is controlled. Mm. So that's the way of being radical, just building a model that takes so much time that at some point the agreed part of the project has moved on, but you're committed to that as a project. So those are the kind of, I don't want to call it resistance, is a bit pretentious, but that's a way of being true to our discipline.
That's true.
Oh, okay, great.
Plant. A plant that doesn't require you to prune water and take care of it at all times. A plant that thrives on its own. That's why I love spontaneous plants. I love weeds because they thrive as the result of disturbance. So whatever we do, what we do is just disturb, makes them thrive. So I think low maintenance plants are plants that thrive without humans' presence, and in that regards, I think mostly weeds, but not in the sense of invasive weeds, but mostly whatever grows. I think I like this thing. There is one of my colleagues at the University of Toronto, Fadi Masood. He always says that when I was in Jordan, we never had weeds. Everything that was green was plants. When I came to North America, there was plants and there was weeds. even Ian McHarg once in one of the lectures was talking about the fact that by the virtue of producing oxygen, plants are doing their jobs. It doesn't matter if they're beautiful, if you like them, if they're aggressive, if what they're doing their job. So in my mind, anything green that can survive all the disturbance that we're causing is game for me. So just find a plant that can survive. Plants are like immigrants.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.